would like to introduce you to our moderators for the session on Sub-Saharan Africa and the MENA region. I'd like to introduce you to Renata Novak. Renata is a social protection and employment specialist at UNDP Africa, and she is based in Addis Ababa, and she will be supported by Mr. Saman Tapa, the regional advisor for social policy for Middle East and Northern Africa from UNICEF MENARO, and he's based in Amman. Renata, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks so much, Joost. And first, let me say happy birthday again to socialprotection.org and many, many, many years to come that we all wish. So I'm moderating a session on regional lessons from from the social protection responses to COVID-19 in Sub-Saharan Africa and in the MENA region. The session will be structured as follows. First, we will have an overview on mapping of those responses by researchers from IPCIG, followed by a short presentation by Mr. Saman Tapa from UNICEF MENA region. Then, and I think that's the main point and main part of our panel, we will have 4 country presentations, and these are from Congo, Namibia, Jordan, and Morocco, and we will finish with questions and answers. I would like to remind you that you also have a simultaneous translation, and also that you can register your questions on the chat. With that, I would like to invite Lena Gronbach from University of Cape Town and IPCIG, Charlotte Bilo, IPCIG, and Saman Tapa to please provide us with an overview of the responses in Sub-Saharan and MENA regions. Thank you.
Yes, hello, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining. Thank you very much, Renata, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with such distinguished speakers. My name is Charlotte Bilo, and I will be presenting today together with Lena Gronbach. I will first speak a bit about the mapping that we've conducted and that we will be sharing today. And then I will zoom in a bit into the MENA region, and then Lena will take over and present to you some of the findings for the Sub-Saharan Africa region. And yes, I can control the slides, great. So first, a few words on the mapping. The findings that we are presenting today are the result of the mapping that the IPCIG team and partners have been conducting since the outbreak of the pandemic. And it covers all 3 components of social protection, so social assistance, social insurance, and labor market interventions. And it provides detailed information about the interventions taken in response to the COVID-19 crisis. So it includes information on coverage level, benefit levels, implementation, registration, and financing features, and many more. The mapping is meant to provide inputs in terms of the country's shock responsiveness, and the framework was developed by the IPCIG jointly with colleagues from the SPACE team. It's based on a review of information publicly available in several languages, and of course also other available mappings, such as the ones conducted by the colleagues from the World Bank and ILO. And the mapping will soon be online available on socialprotection.org, and this is funded by UNDP and GIZ. Then very important, before we start, we have to acknowledge the contributions of our colleagues and partners. First of all, for the Sub-Saharan Africa region, we would like to thank Petra Petstekova from UNDP Africa, who was the main focal point for the Sub-Saharan Africa region, together with Lena. And from the IPCIG team, I would like to thank Luca Sato, Jean-Pedro Ritz, Maya Hamad, as well as Thea Westphal and our UNVs. And last but not least, very important, for the MENA region, the mapping also substantially drew on a technical note from the issue-based Coalition for Social Protection in the MENA region, which includes all UN agencies working on social protection. It is co-chaired by ILO and UNICEF. And the node was an important foundation for the mapping for the MENA region. And it was developed by the IPCIG, or within the partnership that the IPCIG has with UNICEF MENARO. And my colleague Maya, she's sharing the the links to the notes in English and Arabic through the chat. So I invite you all to have a look. Just a few words on the guiding questions of this presentation, but also of the overall conference. You saw them earlier already, and you will come across them again throughout the course of the conference. In our presentation today, we won't cover all of them, but we want to provide some inputs into some of them, namely coverage, adequacy, and delivery chain. A few numbers on the COVID-19 situation in the two regions. I will not read them out because of lack of time, but just to note that the MENA region has had slightly above 2 million cases since the outbreak of the pandemic, and the Sub-Saharan Africa region almost 1.2 million, representing respectively 6.2 and 3.3% of all cases globally. In terms of the economic impact of the crisis, we can see that GDP is projected to decrease for both regions in 2020, and even more so for the MENA region, and especially because of the oil exporting countries in the Arab region that are now suffering from reduced demand for oil, and of course the reduced oil prices. Now coming to the findings of the mapping, this is just a geographic overview. You can see the MENA countries in blue, Sub-Saharan Africa countries in green. A darker shade means more measures, and a lighter ones means less. But here it's of course important to highlight already that this is based on the information available that we were able to map. And having more numbers or having more measures is not necessarily a indicator for a better response, because it depends, of course, very much on the nature of these responses. In the two pie charts at the bottom, you can see the distribution by component, and we can see that actually social assistance is the most common component in both regions. But in the MENA region, we also see that labor market and social insurance measures played a significant role. And here, just an overview by country. First, for the MENA region, we can see that Jordan leads in the number of responses mapped. Here, it's important to highlight also that we did not include humanitarian measures by international organizations here. And again, it's based on the information available. For the Sub-Saharan Africa region, Angola leads in terms of the overall number of responses, closely followed by South Africa, Kenya, and Mauritius. And now I will just zoom in to the three different components a bit and look at the specific instrument used in each. Starting with social assistance, we can see that in both regions, subsidies in yellow are the most common instrument used, and this includes a variety of subsidies, so food, fuel, but also utility subsidies. In gray, emergency cash transfers were the second most common measure, and those were, as we all know, often targeted at informal and daily wage workers. Then in-kind transfers, often in the form of food baskets, here in orange, they also played an important role in both regions. Now, social insurance, as quickly mentioned before, in the Sub-Saharan Africa region, they played a less significant role. But in the MENA region, we see actually a number of measures related to unemployment benefits and leave policies. And the numbers inside the bars, they represent the number of responses for each category. And we chose to show here only the most common ones. Then the third component, so labor market, here we did map more instruments than for social insurance, and in both regions, wage subsidies were actually the most common instrument. In the MENA region, we also saw a couple of countries that lowered or deferred their social security contributions for firms or employers, And this, of course, with the aim to relieve employers and prevent dismissals. Now, a few takeaways for the MENA region based on the mapping. In terms of coverage, you can see that we mapped almost 70 interventions that increased beneficiary coverage, so either by introducing a new program or by including more beneficiaries into an existing program. And as you can see in the pie chart in blue, actually the introduction of new programs was more common than expanding existing programs. In terms of the instruments used for registering beneficiaries for new programs, such as emergency cash transfers, we saw that many have relied on online platforms, and examples here are Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, and we're very glad that we have the representatives from Jordan and Morocco on the panel today who will provide us with more information later on their responses. Then for, in terms also of coverage, looking now at a selection of cash transfer programs, most of those are new interventions. And you can see in blue the estimated share of the population covered, and in orange how much the benefit represents in terms of the average monthly income or expenditure in the country, depending on what was available and more recent. We adjusted the values for inflation, but nevertheless there are of course a couple of limitations, assumptions to this graph, so it should be seen as an exercise. I will not go much into detail of the methodology, but just a few remarks. Of course, if we look at the adequacies of the benefit level of the benefits paid, then one important point is, of course, to see the frequency, so how often were the benefits paid. And this you can see in the number in brackets. And another important limitation is that for some programs, the information is only based on government announcements, so they have not necessarily been implemented yet. But I think despite these limitations, there's, I think, two interesting takeaways from this graph. One, it shows that most of the benefits, they represent between 10 and 20% of the average income or consumption per month in the country. And different than you may think, there does not seem to be a trade-off between the coverage and benefit level. So the largest interventions are not the ones with the lowest benefit value. And again, Morocco and Jordan stand out with their responses here. Then a similar graph on the selection of social insurance and labor market interventions. We did a similar exercise here. The difference is that we compared coverage of the labor force and not the total population. And the benefit, we looked at it as a percentage of the average monthly wage where this information was available. So overall, we can see that those interventions, they cover only a small part of the labor force, but when data is available, they pay a significant amount of the wage. And I think, the Tadamon 2 program is interesting to highlight here, a wage subsidy scheme, which also included firms that were not in the social insurance system before, and that helped to increase formalization on the long run, which I think is one interesting takeaways from the region. And yeah, I invite you all to have a look at the mapping once it's online, and also the notes shared in the chat box. And with this, I will hand over to my colleague, Lena Gronbach, who will talk a bit about the Sub-Saharan Africa region. Over to you, Lena.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. My part will zoom in on some of the key aspects of the social protection response in Sub-Saharan Africa. The focus will really be on social assistance, as this has been the major part of the protection response in the region, as we saw earlier in the presentation, and before from UNDP, with whom I worked on the map. So the first aspect I will look at is coverage expansion, for which we have seen two key mechanisms in sub-Saharan Africa. The first one being cash transfers, which we can see here. So the graph on the left shows the countries that have announced the largest coverage expansions as percentage of total population. In total, we mapped 25 expansions in 22 countries, but many of them ended up amounting to less than 1% of the total population, even after the expansion. So they have not been included in this particular graph. And what's also important to note is that while some of these expansions look quite impressive, it must be said that most of these are long-term, so they're mostly still in progress, or some of them haven't started yet. And that also means that the percentages in the graph are mostly target values announced by governments, as many of those programs are still resolving funding questions or are busy with the enrollment process for the actual expansion. Next slide, please. So then the second mechanism that we've seen in sub-Saharan Africa in terms of increasing coverage has been the launch of new programs, both cash and in-kind. So similar to MENA, most of the interventions in terms of expanding coverage have been new programs. The graph on the left shows the 5 emergency cash transfers with the largest coverage given as percentage of the total population. And the graph on the right shows the same, also the 5 largest programs for emergency in-kind transfers. What must be noted is that the countries in brackets are the ones where coverage data is based on announcement or initial estimates. So we don't have actual coverage data for all of them. And as you can see, many of the in-kind transfers have quite large coverage compared to the cash transfers. And that's partly due to the fact that especially food parcels are usually distributed at household level. So one parcel can reach between 4 and 8 individuals. On the left, also you can see that the cash transfer with the largest coverage was the emergency income grant in Namibia. And we will surely hear more about this later in the country presentation. All right, next slide, please. So this slide zooms in a little bit on the most widely used social assistance instruments in the region, which is subsidies, as we saw earlier in the graph. And in sub-Saharan Africa, we mapped a total of 50 subsidy programs in 33 countries. And as you can see here, 19 of them, of each category, were water and electricity or utility subsidies. And equally, we had 19 mobile money subsidies, which I think is quite particular to the social protection response in sub-Saharan Africa. So I won't go into this in too much detail, but as you can see, subsidies were generally very popular in West Africa. Both of those categories were applied automatically, so we didn't have specific enrollment campaigns, but for utilities, they were mostly applied to low usage customers or those using a social tariff where this was available. And for mobile money users, most of those applied to all users of particular mobile money platforms to encourage digital payments and avoid, for example, crowding for cash transfers or for cash payments more generally. Next slide, please. So the last and one of the key aspects that I want to look at as part of my presentation is the use of digital tools. And this is both for beneficiary enrollment and also for the payment function. And I will look specifically at new emergency cash transfer programs here. So these are not horizontal expansions of existing one, but really the new cash transfers that we've seen in the country, in the region. Now, in sub-Saharan Africa, many countries did not have comprehensive social registries or databases prior to COVID. So in many cases, special enrollment campaigns were used to register additional households, or in many cases, also informal workers that had not been covered by existing databases. And as you can see in the graph on the left, out of a total of 32 new enrollment campaigns, the majority actually used digital enrollment tools. Some offered both digital enrollment and in-person campaigns. And what's also interesting is that we will probably see a spillover of those tools into existing cash transfers. We're already seeing this in South Africa, where the government has just about a week or two ago launched a digital application platform for the existing social grant program. And I think it's quite likely that we will see this happening in other countries beyond the emergency response. Next slide, please. So, and as you can see here in the graph on the left is this trend is actually more pronounced. Yeah, that this trend is more pronounced even when it comes to payment systems. So the use of digital payment methods and specifically mobile money has really been a defining characteristic of social protection and social cash transfer programs in sub-Saharan Africa. As you can see, close to 60% used mobile money as the payment mechanism, and only 17% of the new emergency cash transfers relied on cash. And once again, this is a trend that we already saw before the COVID response, but the pandemic has really accelerated the use of mobile money, and even some of the existing cash transfer programs, which are not included in the graph, but some of them have actually switched from cash to mobile money as part of their COVID response during the pandemic. So for example, Lesotho, Eswatini, and Nigeria are examples here. Next slide, please. So this is our final and last slide, and it's just meant to give a quick summary of some of the key opportunities and challenges that we identified in our mappings. So as you can see, one of the key opportunities in both regions is really the collection of new beneficiary data as part of the response, not just for the emergency part, but also later on for the establishment and in some cases the expansion of the social registries, which can then be used for future social protection responses and scale-ups. Then in Middle East and North Africa, another opportunity consists in the stronger role of social insurance, which has in some cases even led to increasing formalization, for instance in Jordan. In Sub-Saharan Africa, opportunities also include the use of mobile money and the digital payment and enrollment platforms that are presented earlier, and potentially also the increasing coverage of vulnerable households and specifically informal workers who were often not covered by existing programs in the region. And yeah, last but not least, the challenges. As you can see in both regions, and I think across the global south, there is obviously a very limited fiscal space for social protection responses. And in most cases, it's not yet clear how this will be handled beyond the emergency phase. In Middle East, North Africa, we also have the challenge of reaching conflict-affected areas, also refugees, and that is actually also an issue in Sub-Saharan Africa, even though I didn't specifically include that. And last but not least, in Sub-Saharan Africa, as you saw on the graphs earlier, there's a very limited presence of social insurance, both generally and in the pandemic response. And as I mentioned, the long-term implementation frames for the planned horizontal expansions are also one of the challenges, and we will have to see to what extent some of those expansions will be implemented. Right, that's it from our side. Thank you very much for your attention, and back over to you, Renata.
Thanks so much, Lena and Charlotte, for this very interesting overview on both regions. I would like now to invite Mr. Saman Thapa from UNICEF MENA region for his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Renata. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, and really thanks to Charlotte and Lena for such an excellent and comprehensive presentation. And thank you to SP.org for inviting me to be a discussant in this session. So I will structure my remarks around three issues. The first is in MENA, the why of what we've seen has happened in terms of social protection responses to COVID-19. And I think it's important to recall the scale of the economic shock and the socioeconomic shock that the region is facing, where already prior to COVID-19, we had a collapse in the oil prices and the economy is already in a very constrained situation. And that has been significantly amplified by the impacts of COVID-19 in terms of lockdowns, in terms of disruptions in trade and services. And as Charlotte pointed out, the impact on economic growth is expected to be very, very significant, and anywhere in the range between 4 to 5%. The social impacts of this economic shock are actually quite striking. ILO, for example, has estimated that in Arab states, up to 17 million full-time jobs, equivalent to 17 million full-time jobs, could be lost due to the impact of this crisis. UNESCOA simulated that up to 14.2 million more people could be falling into poverty. And from UNICEF, we've done simulations that indicate the significant impact on child poverty, where in the short term, up to 12.2 million children across the region from countries where we have data could be falling into multidimensional child poverty. And in countries like Tunisia, there could be an increase of up to 6 to 10 percentage points in monetary child poverty, wiping out almost a decade of progress. And then, of course, we have the conflict and fragility multiplier in countries like Sudan, Lebanon, Iran, and Yemen. So I think governments have actually recognized that very quickly and acted on that. Which brings me to my second point in terms of how this crisis response of social protection in MENA perhaps debunks the myth that national social protection responses cannot be swift and cannot reach respond to emergencies at scale and on time. Since March, there have been rapid and large-scale expansion of national social protection responses. In Morocco, which we'll hear about in a bit, 6 million households have been reached in a matter of weeks. 400,000 households in Jordan, over 1 million households in Iraq. So across all contexts, from development settings to humanitarian settings, we've seen national governments take the lead and respond very effectively. And this reinforces, I think, the centrality of national systems and social protection systems in responding to crises. And for UNICEF, that is a key tenet of our support. My third point then is in terms of where next. So we've seen the first generation of responses focus on timeliness and scale of social assistance, waivers, and so forth. But where next? And I think in line with the title of this conference, how do we turn a crisis into an opportunity? Governments in MENA have fundamental decisions to make right now about how to exactly do that in terms of national social protection systems. And I think particularly in two areas. The first is in terms of the policy and vision of where MENA governments want to go vis-a-vis social protection systems. How to move, for example, to more inclusive, life cycle-based social protection approaches, as opposed to more, narrow and targeted approaches, especially learning from the lessons of a crisis like this, where population groups have fallen very quickly into vulnerability and been pushed into poverty in a very dynamic manner. The second, of course, in a context like MENA, is how to make systems more shock responsive. In many cases, for instance, some of these responses were based on more temporary and ad hoc measures, but that needs to be systematized. The third, and colleagues have already raised that, I think, including the opening speakers, about improving financing, and by improving financing, relating both to the adequacy, but also the efficiency and effectiveness of spending on social protection. So how do governments want to, shape a vision of social protection in these respects? And governments like Morocco, Jordan, and Sudan are already undertaking exercises to shape this vision going into the future. The second is in terms of operational aspects, which colleagues already flagged earlier as well. I think in terms of three particular areas: data, in terms of making use of the rich data that has been collected from registrations from these large-scale responses ranging from Tunisia to Iraq and Sudan. In terms of integration between contributory, non-contributory social protection, how can that be improved? Integration between social protection and social services, and in a context like MENA, integration between humanitarian social protection programming and national systems-based social protection programming to make the social protection responses more sustainable and systems more sustainable going forward. So basically, I think there are decisions that will be made in the short term in these respects that will have very lasting consequences. And I like what I heard in one of the SP.org webinars about the need to act short term, but think longer term in doing that. So thank you very much, and a very happy 5th birthday to SP.org.
Thanks so much, Saman, for your reflections on the MENA region. If I may add a couple of points on Sub-Saharan Africa based what we've seen on the mapping, I also would like to make perhaps 3 points. First, the issue that because of the high informality, and that's the same with MENA region, but more so even in Sub-Saharan Africa, where about 90% of workforce is in the informal market, the crisis has really exposed a massive, massive coverage gap in terms of the informal economy workers. They're not all extremely poor that they would be sort of covered by social assistance, but they're very vulnerable, and months in and out of lockdowns have made their livelihoods extremely compromised. So that's the first point. The second point, what we've seen from the overview is that these measures are temporary. We don't see yet, at least, plans for incorporation for expansion of social protection systems that would go beyond the few months of food subsidies, food transfers, utility subsidies, or cash transfers. So that is temporary, and we have seen also, which is from the perspective of the design of such programs, that we've seen it, for example, in Southern Africa, in Eastern Africa, where we have the expansion of the existing programs. We've seen that these systems are more agile and can be adjusted faster. They're more risk responsive. Whereas in countries where they have been no mature or none at all social protection systems, we need to build from scratch. And here we've seen, you have pointed out to many innovations that can help. So the lesson here is, the third point is, what does it mean for the future? The lesson here is, it's fantastic to have this overview and analytical background. We need to study those solutions. We need to see what works, how fast we can deliver cash, and what methods we can use for that, so that we can advocate and help countries as international community, but also governments. They can see what can be done and how fast, and with what means. And the very important, for me at least, issue is that we really need a paradigm shift in what social protection is for Sub-Saharan Africa, because we cannot afford to have millions of people who have no access to any form of social protection, which is currently the case with the informal economy workers. So these are my points. Thank you so much for the work done on the overview and mapping. I know this is still ongoing, but now we will turn to very interesting presentations from 4 countries. I would like to invite the first presenter from Congo, Mr. Raphael Akoli, who is the Director of Planning and Statistics at the Ministry of Social Affairs and Humanitarian Action. And I would like to remind you, as well as all other country presenters, that you will have 12 minutes, and I will set my timer for that. And please, the floor, Mr. Akoli, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Je pense que vous me suivez. Alors, la présentation du Congo va être faite par le conseiller aux affaires sociales du ministre qui vient de nous rejoindre. Je vais lui donner la parole pour qu'il puisse présenter la situation du Congo. C'est M. Laurent Niama. Je pense qu'il est connecté. Monsieur le conseiller, est-ce que monsieur le conseiller peut prendre la parole pour l'intervention du Congo? Est-ce que monsieur le conseiller est en ligne?
Monsieur Raphaël, je pense que comme nous avons seulement 12 minutes, si vous pouvez présenter, et pour les questions, le conseiller pourra se joindre à vous. Merci.
Voilà. Ok, d'accord. Alors, par rapport au canevas qui nous avait été envoyé, je pense que la première question qui nous avait été demandée, c'était de savoir qu'est-ce qui se faisait avant le Covid, dans le contexte pré-Covid. Alors, au niveau du ministère des Affaires sociales, nous préparions le passage à l'échelle du projet des transferts monétaires au ménage vulnérable Kisungui, projet appuyé par la Banque mondiale et l'AFD. Nous travaillons aussi, monsieur le conseiller. Allô? Allô? Oh là là, il y a un problème de connexion. Oui, monsieur, on n'a que 12 minutes là, on va aller. Alors, nous travaillons le projet d'inclusion productive des personnes vulnérables que le ministère va mettre en œuvre avec l'appui de l'AFD. Et un autre travail concernait donc la mise en place d'un système de protection au bénéfice des enfants autochtones et des peuples vulnérables avec l'appui de l'UNICEF. Et l'intervention était beaucoup plus orientée sur l'éducation et surtout pour les enfants autochtones. Alors, en ce qui concerne l'autre question, c'était qu'est-ce que le gouvernement a compris dans les dernières années? Alors, à ce niveau-là, par rapport aux actions liées à la protection sociale, le gouvernement a mis beaucoup plus d'accent sur les transferts monétaires et nous avions prévu, par exemple, pour les années passées, 12 207 ménages et à ce jour, on a réalisé pour ces transferts-là 9 985, soit un taux de réalisation de 81% par rapport à ces transferts monétaires. Et nous travaillons aussi sur les activités génératives de revenus. Et aujourd'hui, on a dépassé ce chiffre-là. On est presque à 1 million par rapport au travail qui a été fait. La question de quelle a été la réponse à la crise en matière de protection sociale, au niveau du pays, le gouvernement a lancé une vaste campagne de mobilisation en vue d'informer les populations sur les gestes barrières. De ça, on a réalisé ce que nous avons appelé l'assistance alimentaire, donc la distribution des kits aux ménages pauvres, aux enfants, dans les structures d'accueil au niveau des grandes villes du pays. On a assisté aussi les personnes âgées prises en charge dans les structures publiques comme privées. Dans les principales villes du pays, c'est-à-dire Brazzaville, et ce travail a été fait avec l'appui de l'Agence française de développement dans le cadre de la réponse au Covid. Et en dehors de ce travail-là, le gouvernement a décidé donc d'appuyer les transferts monétaires. Et il était prévu au niveau du gouvernement d'étendre de façon urgente avec l'appui de la Banque mondiale les transferts monétaires au niveau de l'ensemble des départements, des 12 départements du pays. Et ça se fait avec l'appui de la Banque mondiale. Ça s'est fait avec l'appui de la Banque mondiale. Et une autre action, c'était donc l'assistance alimentaire que les populations bénéficient dans le cadre de l'appui du PAM et du projet que nous intitulons le projet Téléma. Et en ce qui concerne la question sur les prochaines étapes de la protection sociale, nous avons identifié donc 4 grands moments. La première, c'est travailler pour renforcer l'identification des personnes vulnérables via ce que nous avons appelé le registre social unique que le gouvernement a développé grâce à l'appui de la Banque mondiale. Une grosse base de données sur l'enregistrement des personnes vulnérables susceptibles de bénéficier de toutes les prestations de protection sociale. La deuxième chose, c'est renforcer et diversifier le partenariat pour des réponses adéquates en situation de vulnérabilité, parce que nous sommes conscients que la protection touche tous les volets et que les personnes vulnérables ont des besoins multiples. Donc, définir le partenariat en situation de vulnérabilité. La troisième chose, c'est le renforcement des interventions sociales en direction de l'âge pauvre. Ça, nous estimons que c'est la voie idéale pour rapidement venir assister les personnes en difficulté. Et la dernière chose, c'est élaborer une stratégie intégrée holistique pour protection sociale non contributive. En termes d'élaboration d'une stratégie intégrée holistique de protection sociale, cette stratégie devait être centrée sur la vulnérabilité, l'ensemble des systèmes tels que mis en œuvre par la pandémie. À ce niveau-là, le souhait serait donc de revaloriser le capital humain, de repenser nos modes de production, de distribution et de consommation des biens et des services, surtout dans le domaine de la santé et de l'éducation, en les recentrant sur l'humain. Et les principaux défis par rapport à tout ce travail-là, c'est le souhait serait qu'on ait une leadership affirmé avec un mandat très clair. Ça, ce serait au niveau du ministère qui portera la stratégie. La parfaite connaissance des cibles, ça c'est un défi. Voilà pourquoi le gouvernement a estimé qu'il fallait mettre en place le registre social unique pour faciliter cette parfaite connaissance. Il y a la mobilisation des ressources et l'exigence de redevabilité. Voilà un peu succinctement partagé ce que le Congo avait comme information concernant cette conférence. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Mr. Akoli for the presentation on Congo. Much appreciated. Let's move now to Namibia. Ms. Tulimeke Munika, who is the incumbent director of National Population Register, Identification and Production at the Ministry of Home Affairs, Immigration, Safety and Security. The floor is yours. Again, you have 12 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible. Thank you. Yes. I have already been introduced. My name is Tulimeke, and I am very privileged to be here to be able to present Namibia's case. I'll be speaking on the social protection responses to COVID-19 that Namibia had put in place. What is the synergy? Specifically, I'll be speaking about the synergy between civil registration system and the social protection, specifically in the light of COVID-19. I will speak about the initiatives that the government of Namibia implemented and the role that civil registration and the identity system played in the rollout of these emergency social protection initiatives, and what exactly the opportunities are that COVID-19 has brought about. Just as a general background, Namibia has targeted policies on poverty reduction, high level from Vision 2030, national development plans, etc. And for this very reason, the head of state at the beginning of this year reorganized social protection ministries into one. He placed them under the office of the Vice President, really showing the prominence that Namibia attaches to social protection, and organized them as the Ministry of Gender Equality, Poverty Eradication, and Social Welfare. They administer almost all, if not all, actually, social grants. This has created less fragmentation structurally, and I think this will lead to better management of the grants. All the grants that are administered under the Vice of the President now are regulated by various pieces of legislation. I'm not going to deal with that now. Let us just go straight to COVID-19. COVID-19 really came and disrupted the normal way of life, I think, for all of us. Whether you lost an income, whether it was having to work from home, we had to deal with the new normal. Services closed down. Unfortunately, some lost their jobs. Some had their income slashed. Very unpleasant, but it's what we have had to deal with. I just want to mention that even as this was happening, civil registration services, which is my field, civil registration services remained essential services, and we'll see why this was very important. So when COVID-19 arrived unexpectedly, how did Namibia react? And I'm only going to deal with the specific actions that the government took that are related to social protection. So Namibia put together an economic stimulus and relief package for COVID-19, and it had 3 parts. So the first part was intended to reinforce the Ministry of Health's emergency procurement of medication and medical equipment. I won't deal with that. The second one was to support companies with affordable credit lines and to provide financial support to employees who had lost their jobs as a result of this economic slowdown. Finally, and most importantly, which is my focus for the talk today, there was a relief package that was branded as the Emergency Income Grant that was designed specifically to provide interim relief for the most vulnerable adult population employed mostly in the informal economy and those who lost their income as a result of the restrictions that were introduced due to COVID-19, and also those who were unemployed. This is the Emergency Income Grant that Lena spoke about as well earlier on. I'll only deal with the Emergency Income Grant. For the Emergency Income Grant, just like most social grants, it is required for you to be able to receive it, for you to provide positive proof of your identity, your nationality, proof of your age, verification of what we call dead alive status. And this was also true for the Emergency Income Grant, for the administration of the Emergency Income Grant. And this brings into play the importance of the National Population Register. I'm now just going to deal with how the CR, Civil Registration and Identity Management System, was used as a tool in administering the grant. So Namibia has an integrated system. The civil registration system and the identity management system are one system. Although the laws that are applicable to the two components are different, are separate, the system is integrated, it's automated, everything is in one. And this is the system that was used for verifications. I just want to highlight, maybe pause at this point and say, the law that regulates the National Population Register provides for secrecy of all the information that is contained in the population register. So the minister responsible for Home Affairs can only share that information really with public sector. The private sector is excluded. but we'll get to see that the emergency income grant, for the emergency income grant, the Ministry of Finance that was in charge of running the show for the emergency income grant contracted a private company to be able to administer it on behalf of the ministry. So what happened was, as the state of emergency was declared by the head of state, state of emergency regulations had to be promulgated. In the state of emergency regulations, the president had to specifically suspend the provision in the law that deals with secrecy for the purpose of identity management, of identity verification when when administering social grants as a result of COVID-19. So as much as government moved swiftly to make sure that those who are eligible would be able to benefit from the grant, government was also very legally compliant, if you may, in making sure that everything was still being done according to the law. Now, on the emergency income grant itself, some of the key features were that it was a once-off payment of 750 Namibian dollars, it's about, I think, $40 US, in cash. So mobile money became very key here. It was expected to benefit about 750,000 individuals to the tune of 562 million Namibian dollars. I won't convert to US dollars. It another grant, a pension grant, and those below would also be eligible to receive other grants if they are vulnerable. The emergency income grant was open from April to May, 14 April to 8 May, where people could self-nominate. So the modality was that I would self-nominate via a text message. And when that text message is received, then the company that the name is MobiPay, I can mention them, it's public knowledge. MobiPay would then, between MobiPay and the telecommunications company, compile the list of the people that applied, do certain verifications. One of the key verifications, which is where the Ministry of Home Affairs, where I work, became involved, is every single applicant had to be verified against the population register. We had to check that the person was actually alive, whether they fell within the age group that was targeted for this grant, whether they had a valid Namibian ID. One of the requirements was you needed to have an ID for you to participate. So even if you were above the age of 18, and you didn't have an ID, you would not be able to benefit, even if you would otherwise have been able to benefit. In Namibia, the age for obtaining an ID card is 16 years old. So we really saw an increase in the demand for ID cards. On the system, on the National Population Registration System, we verified over 2 million applicants. Some people applied more than once, and some were just fake IDs. But it was a close to seamless process because everything was done electronically. You ran it once on the system, and then it would indicate whether it was a match or not. This has really shown us that an integrated civil registration and ID management ecosystem is a critical component in service delivery for social I hope I was not interrupted.
Alors, j'ai l'impression que j'ai été coupé. Bon, je vais essayer de reprendre rapidement.
Yeah, so we have seen how the integrated CR system is very important in this component and how swiftly it could work. Many times we sit and we think our systems are not yet there. We still have to do a whole lot of work. But the emergency that was right in front of us also sort of catapulted us to be able to take emergency decisions. So things that we thought were not possible were actually possible. So we were able to do the verifications immediately. The systems were running fast. Just the fact that the CR system is integrated with the ID system was really massive, massive help. We've learned what opportunities has COVID-19 unmasked for us. For me personally, I think one of the key things that sort of like comes to the fore is we are actually able, in Namibia, we have the systems that can actually run, and some of the restrictions that we have in the law are probably not as necessary today as they were in 1996, for example, when the Identification Act was passed. So what we have seen now is that data protection and information sharing is one of the areas where we need to maybe relax a bit. But I'm happy to inform that the Civil Registration and Identification Bill is in the process to be able to repeal the old laws that deal specifically with that clause on privacy, so that we can have better social protection nets and have institutions, even private institutions, for insurance, for the banking industry, that they should also be able to do data verifications against the population register. So for the emergency income grant, we do not have all the official stats yet to be able to say how many people have benefited in total. But we know for sure that there are deceased people's IDs that were used to apply for the emergency income grant. And these ones were obviously now checked out when the verifications were done against the system. There are those who applied and they were not eligible because they did not fall between the necessary age groups. We've learned certain lessons that are going to enable us to improve our systems moving forward, but it has also become very clear that social protection, everything concerning social protection, including identity management, should only be an emergency during a time such as the COVID-19 that we have. Our systems must put in place safeguards, must put in place mechanisms to make sure that the system keeps running smoothly, continuously, and not only during this time of COVID-19. Am I still within my 12 minutes?
Actually, you're out of time, so please wrap up. Thank you.
I'm actually done. Thank you very much, and a happy birthday to socialprotection.org.
Great, thank you so much. That was very, very interesting to hear from Namibia, especially as you have really talked about a bit of a nitty-gritty of what it means to deliver emergency income grant and what is needed, the data privacy issues, the legal framework issues that you have pointed out, so as well as the need as well as you really also highlighted the ability now that we have with mobile money and so on, which is a great opportunity. So thanks so much for that. We just heard two presentations from Sub-Saharan Africa, and we're going now to MENA, to Jordan and Morocco. We are very fortunate and grateful to have Minister of Social Development with us, Honorable Ms. Basma Musa Ishakat. I welcome you, and the floor is yours. You also have 12 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. And good morning, everybody. As indicated, my name is Basma Ishakat. I'm the Ministry of Social Development in Jordan, and will give you a short presentation about Jordan's social protection sector response during COVID-19. The points I will cover. The points I will cover in this presentation are to give you a brief introduction about Jordan, and then to provide you with social protection context and situations before COVID-19, main challenges and opportunities of social protection sector, and our response in Jordan during COVID-19, and finally, the lessons learned and the priorities from this crisis. I'll start by giving a brief outline about Jordan. Jordan is a small country that has a total population of around 10.7 million persons. The capital city of Jordan is Amman, and it covers an area about 89 square kilometers. Out of the 10 million population that we have in Jordan, we have 1.4 million refugees are hosted in Jordan, out of which 750,000 are registered with UNHCR, and 83% of them live in urban areas outside the camp. The poverty rate in Jordan before COVID, it was announced to be 15.7%, and the unemployment was 19%. It rose dramatically, actually, by 4.4% among male and by 1.4% among females, to reach a total of 23 in this time. The characteristics of Jordanian poor, actually, like many other countries in Jordan, poor are characterized to be living in large families. The average number of households, poor households, is 7, and only 58% of the poorest participate in the labor market, with 73% of them working in the private sector, and around 50% who are not registered in social protection. And the number of migrant workers is growing fast, and the competition with low-paid jobs appears in Jordan. In addition to that, the average wage of poor workers is 241 JDs, which is around $340 US. 44% of poor people in Jordan are on debt, and they have taken a loan. Let's now talk about the social protection context prior to COVID-19 in Jordan. Jordan has a long history of providing social protection programs in different areas. It started to be the highest share of public spending, where around 18.9% of the public budget is mainly spent on pensions. However, spending on non-contributory social assistance programs is less than 1% of the GDP. Jordan is one of the few countries which witnessed economic shocks and influx of refugees that have strained the financing and provision of public services, and it contributes to increasing vulnerabilities and shrinking the space for the fiscal space. Important steps were taken recently to strengthening the system by enhancing targeting, improving coordination, and covering the most vulnerable with the social services. I'll now provide the major midterm policy milestones that include the following. First of all, in 2014, we at the government, and mainly at the Social Security Corporation, decided on expanding the coverage of the social protection by covering the micro firms, by increasing the age of early retirement, and increasing monthly contributions. Then in 2018, a decision was taken to double the number of the National Aid Fund beneficiaries. These are the poor people who receive cash assistance in Jordan. The decision was to double the number of beneficiaries during the coming 3 years. After which, The National Unified Registry was operationalized, and the completion and testing of the data from around 100 public and private agencies for targeting purposes were collected to improve the work of the National Aid Fund and to better target the people based on data that is collected from these institutions. In 2019, the government adopted the National Social Protection Strategy that was adopted by the government, and it has three main pillars, mainly focusing on social assistance, social services, and social insurance, and the labor market. I'll cover some key features when considering the shock responsive of social protection systems adapted from a UNICEF report. The first pillar is the financial resources. Before COVID, we've used to have a high spending on social protection, and that the main source for funding was the national budget that comes from the government. Post and during COVID, additional financing mechanisms from different sources came out, and we started to have the budget line items from the Social Security Corporation and charity support that was open to get donations from public, private, and persons, and that were called Himmat Watan, Al Khair account, and health account were open for people to get the donations. Under the system's availability and readiness, expansion and modernization of cash transfer programs at the National Aid Fund under TAKAFUL connected to the National Unified Registry started. However, the need for further systems in place came up during COVID, and we started establishing the National Social Protection Response Committee led by the Minister of Social Development and comprised of key social protection players. Coordinated social assistance through one monitoring dashboard and exchange data of beneficiaries, and the use of the TAKAFUL platform to register cash assistance beneficiaries online. For enrollment and targeting to cash transfer assistance, availability of data was the key actually to the success that we've made. We've used to have data using the National Unified Registry for beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries of the cash assistance from the National Aid Fund. However, the maturity of the National Unified Registry and connecting it to more agencies working in social protection, that provided us with reliable data that was used as a base of decisions on potential beneficiaries from different programs. Payment and cash assistance, it used to be manual, and we've used to provide a card for the beneficiaries, and they used to receive their allocations using the post offices in cash. However, a major transformation took place during COVID, where automated portal to register for e-wallets complemented by interactive SMS, awareness sessions, scanned payments used for a person and open an account. So we've moved actually to automated registration and payment systems. For monitoring and evaluation, it used to be paper-based grievance letters. Decision was made by a committee on case by case, and then we shifted to an online format for call center, automated cases handling system based on pre-designed GRM flow. The opportunities and challenges we faced in Jordan. I'll start with the opportunities. We actually were able to do recent sector updates, the operationalization of the National Unified Registry, and the e-payment enabled us to take a quick, rapid response. Coordinated efforts through the National Social Protection Committee played a major role actually in helping us moving forward smoothly. and then developing emergency finance strategies and establishing the Himmat Watan Fund and the charity account and the health account through donations from public, private entities and individuals. These were the opportunities that we took from the COVID-19. However, like many other countries, other challenges associated with the situation came up. One of which is technical issues facing the transfer to automated systems came up. We had to shift to electronic systems like e-wallets, e-payments. The infrastructure for such were not ready at that time, and we had to react very quickly to respond to them. Institutionalization of social protection committee within a national strategy is some challenge that we have also to face. Another thing is the sustainability of the funding. We've received, as I've mentioned, some resources and some allocations from the donations. However, the sustainability for such donations needs to be secured. And finally, the prolonged nature of the crisis and implications on increasing vulnerability and mainly unemployment and poverty should be taken into consideration. The response on National Social Assistance Program, we established a new emergency program specifically designed for informal workers with rapid delivery through e-wallets for over 240,000 households, around 1.3 million individuals. Another thing was the provision of cash and in-kind assistance to existing and new beneficiaries of social assistance programs continued throughout the crisis, where around 500,000 households, approximately 2.45 million individuals, benefited from cash assistance during the crisis by August 2020, where a total of 5.8 thousand parcels and food vouchers were delivered as well. At the level,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you please wrap up, please?
Yes. The government protected workers by preventing dismissal of workers during the emergency. Several actions helped formal workers to gain some liquidity, and the Social Security Corporation retroactive registration policies have resulted in formalization in business. At the level of social services, we ensure the continuity of health, education, and protection services, the protection of vulnerable people living in care centers, and the national communication awareness campaign was done. Lessons learned during the crisis was investing in the preparedness and shock responses of social protection system is a must. Beneficiaries prefer cash over in kind, and the need for cash forward programs arise. Creating a single gateway to seek different social protection services is a must. And then there is an urgent need for investing in technology for vulnerable households, and investment should be made in order to shift towards e-health. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, for this very comprehensive presentation. You have taken a systemic sort of approach to social protection and what needs to be done during the crisis and going forward. So that's much, much appreciated. Now we're turning to Jordan, which will be the last country presentation. Mr. Ahmed Belada is Deputy Director in charge of implementing the finance law at the Ministry of Economy, Finance and Administrative Reform, and he will speak in French. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, 12 minutes.
Bonjour. Vous m'entendez?
Oui, on vous entend.
Merci. Donc, bonjour tout le monde. Au début, je voudrais juste préciser que cette intervention devait être faite par Monsieur le ministre de l'Économie, des Finances et de la Réforme de l'Administration, mais pour un engagement de dernière minute, il n'a pas pu être parmi vous. Donc, il s'en excuse et il m'a chargé de faire cette intervention en son nom. Donc, mesdames et messieurs, honorable assistance, c'est pour moi un réel plaisir de participer avec vous aujourd'hui à cette conférence portant sur le thème « Transformer la crise Covid-19 en opportunité. Quelles sont les prochaines étapes pour la protection sociale ?» Je remercie à cet égard Social Protection pour les efforts déployés pour l'organisation de cette conférence et pour le choix de cette thématique qui est devenue le centre de préoccupation de tous les pays face à la crise engendrée par la pandémie du Covid-19. Les différentes interventions apporteront, j'en suis convaincu, une grande richesse à la réflexion sur le futur de la protection sociale dans ce contexte de pandémie mondiale. Dans ce cadre, je voudrais tout d'abord décrire brièvement l'expérience marocaine pré-Covid-19 en matière de protection sociale avant d'aborder les défis à relever ainsi que les mesures financières et économiques prises par le Maroc pour faire face à cette crise, pour conclure enfin par les perspectives et prochaines étapes pour une réforme en profondeur de ce système. Comme vous le savez, mesdames et messieurs, le monde connaît la crise la plus sévère et la plus grave depuis celle des années 30 du siècle dernier, car elle a entraîné une augmentation des cas de faillite des entreprises et le chômage au sein des ménages, générant des répercussions
worldwide with social and economic consequences and pressures on government budgets. Morocco was one of the pioneer countries who were very proactive when it comes to anticipation of the risk posed by COVID-19. Our country decided it was a priority to provide our health systems with the equipment necessary to protect the population and itself. We took measures to guarantee the livelihood of all Moroccans and the resilience of the national economy facing this health crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, before presenting the different measures, I would like to seize the opportunity to do an overview of the Moroccan experience when it comes to social protection. Actually, considerable efforts have been implemented to develop a diversified protection system when it comes to grants. We have two main items: the contribution to the social security, which is the social coverage networks, and the different pension plans guaranteeing social protection for active population and retired population. 14 million people are involved in this program. The second plan is the solidarity income or solidarity grants, which are for people not contributing to the health system. So we guarantee access to the health sector for all citizens, initiatives for the development, human development and poverty eradication of vulnerability and social exclusion, a program of social grants for disenfranchised and poor families and vulnerable groups. So the Solidarity program touches about 10.8 million people. It is important to say that in Morocco, social protection matters are an investment in human capital, and we need to help citizens develop so that they can contribute effectively to the country's development and fight against inequality. And this respect, the investment in social protection is one of the priority of the Moroccan government, and budgetary efforts have been made every year to develop the social protection programs. Fiscal law allocates more than half of the national budget to these activities. Despite the efforts undertaken, there are a lot of disparities between social population. There are many risks and problems facing the social protection programs due to the multiplicity of the programs to the targeting system and the funding of the activities. There's a need for coordination of all the activities which needs to be operated. Our King Mohammed VI, in a speech from 2018, said that the government and all stakeholders need to work on the restructuration of the national protection system. This will by our monarch to reform our system was confirmed in the speech of July 29, 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, so that we have the means, the financial means at our disposal, the King created a special fund for COVID-19. 10 billion dirhams, so 1.6 billion US dollars, was given by the King so that the program could be developed and identifying the national stakeholders involved in the allocation of grants. 33.6 billion dirhams. The fund has three objectives: the re-strengthening of the health system with 320 million US mobilized to improve the health system and the procurement of equipment, medicine and PPE equipment. Then the protection of the livelihoods of the population, 225 US monthly allocated to people working in the fields of the public and private sector and who had to stop their activity because of the lockdown. 840,000 workers were benefited from this between March and May 2020. 700 million US dollars were spent for this. The third axis is a support to households around the country. We give between 90 and 130 US dollars monthly to the most vulnerable population. 5.5 million households benefited from these grants. 1.7 billion US dollars were spent for this measure. More than 400,000 people were able to benefit from credit from banks between March and June 2020. It's important to say that to benefit from these different grants, a platform was created to have people register themselves and explain whether they were workers who were on lockdown and not able to work from home, or cash transfers for the rural population. Mobile cash access centers were developed. We have been able to establish that there were gaps in the systems. The vulnerability to external shocks of a lot of members of our population. In this framework, and according to the King's decision, Morocco is now developing a roadmap for the future when it comes to the restructuring of our protection system. The King ordered a generalization of the social coverage for all citizens in Morocco. Between 21 and 22, there will be a compulsory medical or health tax for all registered workers, and there will be grants for loss of employment between 24 and 25. All stakeholders at the national level will have to be involved over a 5-year period.
5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5 year period. 5
there will need to be establishment of preconditions when it comes to the reform of the professional protection system, the reform of the social programs already in place to measure the impact on beneficiaries, and the operationalization of the national registry to gather data on households and citizens to have a better targeted program.
Excuse me, you have 2 more minutes, please. Thank you.
Another precondition is the improvement of the social protection system through the creation of a governance unit. Finally, we are targeting the fiscal reform with a unified contribution for all registered workers to pay into a fund a tax that will cover health, pension, and emergency social grants. Ladies and gentlemen, the reform of social protection is a very wide-ranging activity, and it will professionalize the governance of the protection sector. The next stages need to mutualize all the efforts of Moroccan citizens so that we are ready to face the next crisis together and have a great governance system to organize the activities around transparency, rule of law, and integrity and equity. I want to thank all the stakeholders who made this event possible. Thank you for the contribution. Thank you for the different activities so that we can make this conference a success and improve the world so that it becomes fairer and more just. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Berada. You were also on time, so much appreciated. This concludes our country presentations. My takeaway from the last one, which is very exciting, what you have just said, is that all people in Morocco will have now access to social protection and also to health insurance. And this is very exciting news for everyone to hear. I know that, so now thank you so much again to all the presenters, and we now have a few minutes for Q&As, and I see that socialprotection.org colleagues are busy on the chat, and also a Namibia representative has been talking and answering questions, so that's really that's great. In that case, perhaps I would like to offer each of the country representative 1 minute to tell us, you have already talked about it, but highlight key lessons from COVID-19 in terms of social protection, 1 or 2 key lessons, and then what are the next step, 1 or 2 next steps, and you will have 1 minute for the concluding statement. Let's start with Congo. Mr. Akoli, are you still with us? Mr. Akoli?
Merci, je suis là.
Yes, I'm still here.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Allez-y. So the lessons learned from what I heard this morning, it's true that the pandemic has highlighted the needs of the population. And the main challenge, I think, was coordination of our activities and the management of the data that we were receiving. And I think the main challenge in the future will be the coordination of the activities. That's it. We have a lot to do when it comes to management of the different activities by different stakeholders in the same field. So we need to have a centralized system. delegate is frozen. We need to devise a strategy touching most communities. We were focusing on vulnerable groups. So this is more or less what I want to highlight from what I heard this morning. All stakeholders, whether internal or foreign, UN agencies, and I think the integrated strategy is the next step for us.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for this statement in which you highlighted the issue of a system that needs to be created and coordination. Let's go to Namibia next.
Thank you very much. Yes, there I am. My last interventions would be that for the key lessons, what we've learned is that our systems must be interoperable and they must be ready for the unexpected. System integrations with proper security safeguards in place must also be a norm. We must not wait until a pandemic comes and hits us for us to run around and do emergency arrangements. Systems must speak to one another, necessary safeguards in place, and I believe in our abilities. Each of us as a country can do everything that is required to make sure that these things are in place because it is possible. It is possible. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let's go to Jordan. The same question, key lessons from COVID for your country and the next steps.
Thank you. As I've mentioned in my presentation, I think that the availability of data from different resources and the investing in the preparedness and shock responsive of social protection systems is a must. What we've learned is that the data that we have used actually to better target the people who are in need played a major role in the success that we achieved actually during the COVID, to respond to COVID. However, we, as many also mentioned by the Namibia representative, that we should also have a shock responsiveness of social protection system. And now we are updating our national strategy for social protection to have a chapter on shock responsiveness in that strategy, so that we are able to deal with the situation when the need arises and to be ready for any shocks that we may face in the future. Thank you again for giving us the opportunity. We appreciate it and we wish you all the best in this conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. And finally, we are going to Morocco.
Yes, I think the COVID crisis was the opportunity for us to ask ourselves if our systems were efficient and ready to act. So I think it's important to capitalize on all that has been done, said, read on this crisis. And the main challenge for me is the establishment of a governance system that coordinates all the activities of the various programs in place in our country. And I think the targeting of the vulnerable groups is something that needs to be done through the registry system. So it will allow us to decide who needs what type of help. Thank you again for the opportunity given to us to present what Morocco did in this field.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for these parting remarks. This has been a fascinating panel, with first the overview of the full picture for both regions, and then with we were able to dive into the country case studies. So that was extremely interesting. I would like to thank all the panelists for your participation, all the participants also for your participation and active participation on the chat, and also to the socialprotection.org team for the organizing of the conference, and wishing everyone happy birthday once again. That concludes our panel. Thank you so much and have a good day. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Renata Novak, for moderating the panel. Thanks to all our speakers. And I'm sure you are ready for coffee break. However, before we do that, I would like to highlight what's coming after the coffee break, because we have still an exciting program for you. So we are going to continue after the coffee break with our open peer-to-peer dialogue, exchange on country experiences, lessons learned, and the potential ways forward for countries in the region. We have some guiding questions for you. You're going to break into smaller groups and you're going to meet some of your peers, and you can share your own country experiences and lessons learned, and maybe draw some conclusion as a smaller group. I just wanted to mention that also the possibility is there that if you speak French as your preferred language, you will be able to join French-speaking breakout rooms. I will explain how after the coffee break. So when we are now going into the coffee break has actually two parts. The first part is a few minutes break, and you can actually refresh yourself, get yourself a coffee and or some tea and relax. And then when you hear me speaking again, and I recommend you to stay on loudspeaker, I would like to introduce you then to our magician. We have an award-winning magician, the current South African close-up magic champion. He will entertain you for exactly 10 minutes and also relates it a little bit to social protection. So I think for the sake of time and energy, we're going to have about 5-6 minutes break. And then, as I said, if you hear my voice, we're going to start the show. And right after, we're going to continue with our peer-to-peer dialogue, and I will give you more instructions how it works. So we hope that you can all stay with us and meet some of your colleagues and discuss important questions after the break. So see you in about 5, 6, 7 minutes from now, and then we're going to start with Stuart Lightbody and with a little bit of magic during our Global E-Conference on COVID-19 crisis. So please stay with us. Thank you. Who captures 2-3 key insights or common themes in your conversation and is ready to share them when we are coming back to the plenary. Yes, all these 3 messages, all these instructions and the 3 questions will be in your chat. And when you are arriving, you might want to introduce yourself very, very quickly with a 20-second turn who you are. Okay, switch on your webcam and keep it on. We really want to get you into a dialogue. Yeah. And so I would like to see now the link in the chat for going to the French room. Some of my colleagues will actually wait for you there. So you see now the French instructions again. Veuillez choisir un modérateur, un rapporteur. And n'oubliez pas d'allumer votre caméra pendant la conversation. C'est très important. C'est très important pour moi. Okay, so I would request our technical team to share the link how to get to the French room. If you are able to speak English and are very comfortable to speak English, it doesn't matter which language is your native language, then please stay. Everybody else who wants to speak in French, please go to the other room. Look at the chat and click on it now. And later we help you to come back to this room, okay? So, accéder ici. So please click on it. So because if you are not going to the French room and you don't speak English, then you might end up in an English speaking table. Okay, I'll give you a few seconds to move on. Yes. So, s'il vous plaît. Changez la chambre en français, s'il vous plaît. L'autre link. Okay, so I'm waiting for a sign if we are good to go. Okay, I heard there was a problem with the link, the first one. So it's the second link. So if it didn't fit it into the chat box, in case you did not manage to come up with a joint reflection, I allow you, maybe if you have one key insight from your conversation you would like to share, you can also write it into the chat so that we see a couple of, but if it's from your group, you can write group 6 so that I know what comes from the group and what comes from an individual reflection. Okay, so I'm not sure if everybody managed to come to that point and think about some common ground, some shared insights. And Anais, you are from the French group, right?
Yes.
Are you all back?
Yes, we are most back.
Okay. Is there anybody from the French group who might want to spontaneously share? Because if they write it in French, maybe not everybody understands, or we can also write in French and we can translate it. Is there any insights for the chat box from the French-speaking tables? Okay, someone is writing in English. Okay, wonderful. So I want to invite you all to look at the chat box and see what's coming up and take note of it. And then maybe I will try to highlight a few things. So as you remember, we had kind of 3 questions. And so there's one, room 1, preparedness is key, use what you have. Top-ups in social assistance or political and community acceptance in BVI of big cash transfers. Fiscal space is important. Okay, I think I have to make it bigger for me. And then so global level, Margaledo wrote, coordination and willingness to work together was great, even at times it led to overload of information. As mentioned by Anita, the working group cash and social protection under Grant Bagan sub was key to bring humanitarian actors and social protection together to discuss and collaborate, including the joint work plan of groups. Okay, group 9. So where's a French group? Social protection system improvement takes time. Perhaps have a neutral, non-political body to give the time and space to mature. Fiscal space is important, becoming critical. Can reprioritize funds, but don't do it at the expense of vulnerable groups. Inclusion aspects get cut first, and preparedness is key. So this was from group 1. So what else? So my screen is not moving that well. The French group, the main success was the rapidity of the responses. Congo, Togo, Benin, Senegal, Tunisia. Even if small, quick support was very efficient. Complementarity of measures to tackle different vulnerabilities. Structural versus crisis specific. and complementary measures to avoid pandemic spreading, sensitization. Interesting. And then from Anita Auerbach, most of us still learning about SRSP, thanks to CALP, social protection on the Grand Bargain subgroup on cash and social protection. We are steadily increasing, steadily increasing. Okay, so it's all moving very fast. So I'm losing it all the time when the chat moves. So please have a look yourself, scroll. There are some very interesting insights. And I think it's very difficult for me to read them now all out, and I will not do that because my chat book is moving all the time. So we are gonna use also these kind of key messages and take note of them, and we'll also use them for the documentation, and maybe some of these messages might even end up on our social media. So before we're gonna wrap up our regional session on Sub-Saharan Africa and the MENA region, I would like to highlight a few more aspects from our learning journey, because now we have heard regional experiences, we have talked about our own experiences, and we have something we want you to do, or we want to invite you to do. So first of all, there is an activity you can do in the next 2-3 days, which we call a self-reflection. So based on a special framework, you can conduct a self-reflection on what your country could have done better if they have prepared in advance to respond to this COVID-19 crisis and beyond. And this framework helps you to reflect on that. And there will be a link in your chat. Please take note of this link. And then you will come to some kind of wall, which is a tool called Padlet. And you can actually go through, with the help of this framework, you can go through different kind of questions, and it will help you to maybe distill some lessons learned for yourself or for your country or for your work. And you can also see what other people are doing. Can I see the preview of that Padlet? So there it is. So this Padlet is also available in English and also in French and also later in Spanish. Yeah, so if you want to write in French and read the instructions in French, that's not a problem. Okay, so that's the first activity we want you to maybe try out. It takes a couple of minutes, but I think it's worth your time. Then secondly, we have an activity where we talk about commitments. So there is something what we call a Tribute video wall. Tribute is also a small digital tool which allows you easily record a 30 to 45 second commitment. So when you follow, again, the link that is provided, and I think we're also going to send a reminder by our tools we are using for scheduling the conference, the so-called SCED, you will get an email as a reminder. Please take a short video about your commitment to social protection. So these kind of little videos will become a very nice video montage. If it's not right the first time, you can always record again. And maybe if you say the 3 powerful words, I am committed, and what you're committed to do, small or big, that would be great. And we also have, again, another little wall, the wall of commitment. If you feel like, okay, my hair is too messy, or I don't feel comfortable speaking on camera. We all know sometimes when the camera starts, suddenly your brain is blank. And it's sometimes very difficult to even record yourself on your own computer. Then we invite you to record a statement displaying what you're committed to be doing and creating to have a positive impact on social protection. And you just write it on the wall of commitment. But if you want to do both, we are most grateful, okay? So now I wanted to check if we can have a close-up from the graphic recording of Sonja Niederhumas. She has worked very intensively, like many of us. She's doing 3 time zones today, and I hope your energy level is still okay. And here you can see a very nice preview of her current work. She also captured the Asia session, and she will continue to polish it, but it looks already very nice. So you will see some interesting quotes or points that were raised, and of course we're going to share that all over social media. And if you take the time to look at it properly, especially at the final version, I'm sure you can structure your thoughts better or your own takeaways. And I see already some people praising you, Sonia, in the chat. And maybe let me quickly sum up a few points we were seeing from our organization team. So maybe just 3-4 key takeaways. So Congo, for example, they highlighted the point that coordination with all stakeholders is very important, especially with international partners. Namibia pointed out that interoperability between the systems and the necessary safeguards is key, as the emergency grant, which relied on self-registration via text with verification, is based on civil registration, showed. Then Jordan, the rapid creation implementation of the emergency CT was facilitated through recent updates in the social protection sector as a whole, including the operationalization of a national unified registry and the launch of the National Social Protection Strategy. And also, they mentioned Jordan, data is key. And last but not least, our colleague from Morocco, the social response to COVID has already influenced the country's long-term social protection response, including fiscal reform and a roadmap to restructure its social protection system for the next 5 years. So that's good to hear. And these are just some preliminary thoughts, and I'm sure you all have your own thoughts. Before we gonna say bye-bye for today, just a quick preview about the coming days. And today was the regional session and our peer-to-peer dialogue. Tomorrow, before I forget it, if you are not have enough, we still have one more session. I saw some people coming to the session from Asia as well as Sub-Saharan Africa and MENA region. There is no award winning when you are doing all three over 3 time zones, but you are all invited to join us for the regional session on Latin America and the Caribbean, starting in a few hours from now. So please join us. And then a reminder of what's coming next. Tomorrow, we have a big menu for you. So we have clinics where you can ask your questions. And there will be experts waiting for you on certain thematic topics. And you can put your questions in the chat box or ask them directly via, and there is a tool we use, Slido, and you get tailored advice. We're gonna have thematic round tables. A group of experts come together on different topics, and we have an interesting conversation also with the audience. Or last but not least, there is the opportunity to visit our virtual expo and the virtual booth. At certain times, you can actually meet an expert there or experts and have an informal conversation about their flagship approaches or products who are all working on social protection. So it's an amazing choice. Please, if you not aware what's on the menu yet and you haven't signed up, go to socialprotection.org to your conference site and check which session you want to join. There will be no plenary or something. On the October 7th, we're gonna have 9 side events on different thematic areas, and key stakeholders have organized that. So there is definitely something interesting for everybody who works on social protection, and maybe some of you want to join even more than one. And they are all offered also over different time zones. So there should be something in a more convenient time zone for you. Last but not least, on October the 8th, we come together one more time. We have 2 expert panel discussions about the implications of the COVID-19 crisis for universal social protection, and an expert panel discussion on about the implications of the COVID-19 crisis for the future of adaptive and shock responsive social protection. We also share some insights. Some colleagues will reflect, and we will discuss the way forward. So it's a big menu. And also, as you recall, I asked you to join for the asynchronous activities. So please make use of all these opportunities. And interact with our community. And if I'm not mistaken, that's all for now. If you would like to share your insights and thoughts on social media, we have a lot of social media channels. So, and there is also a hashtag, what's next for SP, and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Please share the message, or maybe I should use the word from Stuart Lightbody. Please share our magic. I think we are here to do some magic for the future. So without further ado, I think that's it from our side. On behalf of the whole team, I really appreciated to see you all here, and maybe some of you going to join us for the Latin American and Caribbean session. That's already then 9 p.m. for me, but I saw lots of colleagues who are actually joining at times which really shows their commitment, like 3 o'clock in the night. And I think that really shows that the social protection community is a special bunch. And so have a good afternoon or good evening or good morning or good rest wherever you are staying. See many of you in a few hours from now, and see you soon. Hopefully, if not in the next sessions, then in real time somewhere in the world. And as my colleague said, all the sessions are recorded and they will be shared with you. So bye-bye Africa, bye-bye MENA region, and everybody from other parts of the world. See you soon.